So hope you all had a good break. Hope you're all healthy and safe and sound and dealing with all of the odd transitions that we're going to have to deal with. The basic plan today is to just go really light, really basic with the class. We're going to talk a little bit about the exam, go over what's going to be on it. In the email that I sent out, you all should have received a study guide. The study guide contains exactly what's on the exam. So let's go over that real fast, and then we'll cover something new. We probably won't go the full 50 minutes today, and that's fine. We're just basically trying to do one more tech run, basically. We'll actually do our first group activities on Friday. So that's when we'll actually really sort of put the technology to the test. And again, just a reminder, if you want to get my attention for anything, you got any kind of question, just go to the reactions tab and give yourself a thumbs up. And I'll be able to unmute you and hear what you have to say. All right. So I guess before we start, any questions? All right, then let's go through. Yeah, and also don't raise your hand. That's be tempting. Just raise your hand if you're going to people doing it in this video. You're all very tiny. I'm not going to be able to see that. So I actually need I actually need the full bore thumbnail or something to actually see it. So, all right, so here's what's going to be on the exam. It's not going to be cumulative at all. But there are some pieces of what was on the first exam you still need to know. So, for example, you need to know what an argument is, what a premise conclusion is. It would be helpful in some cases to standardize arguments. You're never going to be given a standardizing an argument question. You're also never going to be giving a diagramming an argument question. Okay? Those are going to be perhaps helpful skills, things to keep in mind, but they're not the kinds of problems that you're going to have on the exam. So here's what's going to be on the exam. Will look exactly like questions you've seen before. You're going to be asked to distinguish deductive from inductive arguments, right? And so there was a group activity and a quiz where you had to do that. You can go back and look at some of those questions. In the course of this, there are also going to be some short answer questions. So make sure you can explain to me what it means to say that an argument is valid, if it's a deductive argument, and what it means to say that a deductive argument is sound, invalid, unsound, and how are those things related to each other. Same thing, make sure you can do that with the idea of strength and weakness in inductive arguments. Right? There might be a question, something like, I don't know, how is a sound argument different from a valid argument? Right? And you'll should have to give like a sentence or two explanation of why. The next thing we're going to be doing is some of those deductive arguments that we did. So the categorical arguments, there are the immediate inferences and the categorical syllogisms, right? So the immediate inferences were the things like, if all SSG is true, what is no SSG? Can you tell? Right? And you'll be using the square of opposition for that. So the reminder, we'll try this. I can't see your questions, by the way, when this is up. Here's our whiteboard. The square of opposition was this. Where you use this to then identify the relationships between the various kinds of categorical sentences. So there'll be a couple questions dealing with those immediate inferences. There'll also be questions dealing with the categorical syllogisms. Those are where we're doing the Venn diagrams to determine if the argument with three premises are valid or invalid. And you might get questions where it'll look exactly like on the quizzes, where you'll first have to sort of standardize the syllogism, right, to make sure the S and the P are the subject and predicate term of the conclusion. You get the M, then I'll give you a list of 5 Venn diagrams, select the Venn diagram that's the correct one, and then you'll have to sort of say, on the basis of the Venn diagram that you selected, is the argument valid? And with all of these, there'll be partial credit. Then we'll have some propositional arguments. Those are the if-thens in particular, where you had to identify things like affirming the consequence or denying the antecedent, and then determine whether or not the arguments were valid based on whether or not they had those forms. And then lastly, for the deductive arguments, we'll do some of the necessary and sufficient condition stuff, right? So is oxygen a necessary or a sufficient condition for fire to burn, right? Or is it both, or is it neither? And again, you'll look just like it did on the quizzes. There won't be anything. There won't be any question you haven't seen. Really, everything will look exactly like it did on the quizzes. The last thing is the inductive arguments, and particularly the fallacies. So in terms of a short answer thing, make sure you can tell me the difference between a probative inductive argument and a statistical inductive argument. Otherwise, all you're going to have to be doing is all the fallacy stuff. So you're going to have to identify what fallacy is this argument committing, and we'll always be committing some fallacy. And also answer the question of, is this argument committing this particular kind of fallacy, right? So is this particular an example of the two-element fallacy? Right, I'll give you an argument about the answer. Particularly for those inductive questions, the questions for fallacies, what I'm mostly going to be looking for is the explanation, right? There's going to be a lot of potential fallacies you can characterize different arguments as, and a lot of different correct ways of explaining it. What's going to matter is that your explanation is enough depth, enough detail that I can sort of follow it. Right? You're going to have about 5 minutes or so per question. That's going to be the rough structure. And my expectation is that the exam should take you 60 minutes. You're going to have 75 minutes. It'd be due on this Sunday through Canvas, 5 minutes. So that's the study guide. Any questions about any of the material or about the format of the exam itself? All right, great. So what we're going to do on Friday, we're actually going to have you bring in questions. So my guess is, particularly a lot of the deductive argument stuff, that was a long time ago, right? So go back, do a little bit of review tonight, tomorrow, figure out where you want us to go over stuff together. And this will be based on what the questions you bring in. So if you want to say, hey, just remind me how categorical syllogisms work, right? Bring that in, and then on Friday, we'll go over some categorical syllogisms. Or, hey, remind me again, what are necessary and sufficient conditions? How are those things different? Let me know, then we'll go over that in class together. And so Friday will be our sort of review day for the exam. We'll also do a little bit of group work on stuff that's not going to be on the exam. So, any questions on the exam? This is super weird, right? I'm finding this super weird, just staring out at the blank screen, the blank silent faces. But yeah, we'll make it all work and get it used to it. Yeah. So again, this is just a reminder for people who have been coming in. If you want to get my attention for something like asking a question or whatever, go down to the reactions tab and give yourself a little thumbs up or something. I'll be able to see that on all the various thumbnails that I see, and then I can unmute you and you can ask your question. So, any questions? All right, then let us turn to something new. So what we're going to talk about now is not going to be on the exam. Right? It'll be on the next exam, won't be on the final, but it's not going to be on this exam. We're going to start working on chapter 5 a little bit. I'm going to flip us over to the shared screen, the whiteboard. Again, I can't actually see your questions there, but I'll flip back and forth frequently so I can sort of leave your thumbs up, and then I'll come find you as I sort of go back and forth. I'm also figuring out how to do all this, so it'll probably go more smoothly subsequent days. So we're going to start with what are called reductio ad absurdum arguments. Latin phrase, it literally means reducing to an absurdity. Now, one important thing to say before we go any further, these are not fallacies. this is a kind of argumentation. So what we're going to start doing now are looking at different kinds of inductive arguments. What we're going to be checking for is, does this kind of argument fall into a fallacy? Is it a good or a bad inductive argument? Is it strong? Does the conclusion follow with a great deal of probability from the premises? Or is it a weak one? But there are going to be good reductio ad absurdum arguments and bad reductio ad absurdum arguments. Right? And our task is going to be to determine, are these good or bad arguments? And in fact, the reason we're going to start with reductio ad absurdums is one useful thing about them. They actually are bad arguments if they commit two of the fallacies that we're already really familiar with, the straw person fallacy and the slippery slope fallacy. So as we go through this, this will be a good starting point for this sort of next portion of the course, because we'll be dealing with fallacies that we're already really familiar with. So I'm going to shut this down for a second and just check and see if there are any questions that are waiting for me. All right. And again, yeah, I have to actually shut down the whiteboard to see questions. So just sort of leave your thumbs up or leave your question up, and then I'll frequently try to flip back and forth. So here would be an example of an argument that uses a reductio ad absurdum. Person A, we should outlaw smoking. Smoking is a dangerous activity. And the government should make all dangerous activities illegal to protect the citizens. Right? Person B. I don't think that makes any sense. Lots of activities are dangerous besides smoking. That we don't think the government should make illegal. Take overeating, for example. Are you saying that should the government outlaw overeating? Person B in this case is the one making the reductio. So what is person B doing in this case? How is person B's argument working? Right? The claim that they're making is that your proposal, person A, is a bad proposal. Why? Because it has sort of absurd implications or absurd consequences. That's the sense of reducing to an absurdity. So the reductio ad absurdum argument is any argument that rejects a proposal or a claim because the claim produces absurdities or unacceptable consequences. In this case, right, the logic person A is using to motivate outlawing smoking would also apply to making overeating illegal, and person B is suggesting that's an absurd or unacceptable consequence, right? We don't want the government making it illegal for people to overeat. So therefore, the logic person A is using, since that logic also entails that overeating should be illegal, it's a bad logic person A's argument or position to be rejected. Right. Again, let's check in. How are we doing here? Any questions so far? Right. Carly, go ahead.
How is this different from a actual fallacy, like one of the ones that we?
Good. It sounds like slippery slope a little bit, perhaps, right? Is that something like that? That's a great question. Good. So, and indeed, that's actually the danger. When this kind of argument fails, it's going to fail because it falls into committing a slippery slope fallacy or straw person fallacy. So let's go back for a second and look at the actual argument and talk about why is this argument not committing the slippery slope fallacy. Right? The difference is person B isn't saying if we outlaw smoking, it will lead to outlawing overeating. It's not saying that this will actually be a real consequence that follows. It's saying that your logic would apply just as readily in this other case, and we don't think your logic works when it's applied to this other case. Right? For it to be a slippery slope fallacy, you actually have to be talking about the real consequences. So here would be a version that actually commits the slippery slope fallacy. This version actually commits the slippery slope fallacy. Right? Because it's actually suggesting that an actual consequence that will follow from person A's proposal is it will be all these other highly unlikely outcomes, right? That will have the government regulating what we do. In the case that actually works, so in the case that doesn't commit the fallacy, the reason it doesn't commit the fallacy in this case is because we're just talking about the logic underlying person A's proposal, right? The logic behind their claim is that if we make dangerous activity, if an activity is dangerous, it's to be made illegal. But there's lots of dangerous activities that we don't think should be made illegal. So the logic of their claim doesn't make any sense. The actual slippery slope case, we're looking at the actual consequences that follow rather than just the logic of the claim. So I'm kind of going to come back. Does that help clarify? And that's going to be one of the central things you're actually going to be asked to figure out in a lot of these. Is a slippery slope fallacy being committed? How are we doing so far? Is this is the kind of argument clear? Any questions about the kind of arguments? Lots of examples of this. This is a pretty common form of argumentation. There's actually, oh, sorry, I see a question. Trevor, you're up.
I was just curious if part of what's making person B's argument absurd is that it is not like having issues on other people, so like how smoking could affect others, and how overeating is just affecting that one person. Does that have anything to do with making it absurd or not, or is that kind of just different?
That's a good question. That's a little bit different. Yeah, that would be how person A could perhaps respond to this fallacy, because the person who's so the way this is supposed to work, in principle, the person who said the absurd thing is supposed to be person A, right? So the absurdity is person A. What person B is claiming in this place is your idea, person A, has an absurd or consequence that you didn't think about, right? Or it has absurd implications or an absurd entailment, right? Person A could come back and say, no, there's a difference between smoking and overeating, right? And that would be, a fine rejoinder or a fine follow-up, right? But that doesn't really directly pertain to whether or not a fallacy is being committed or whether or not it's a good reductio argument. So all you need to have just a sort of a functioning reductio argument is, I'm trying to move a little bit closer so people are saying I'm a little quiet. All you need to have a good reductio argument is you need to actually be addressing what it is the person is saying. So is that a helpful response?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Good. Any others before we head back? Maybe look at another example. All right, let's look at a bad example, an example that doesn't work. Oh, and was everyone done with the whiteboard? I'm going to need to erase it. Anyone want another look at it before I erase it? All right. So here would be a bad reductio argument. Here's an example of one that does not work. And then I'll actually be inspired for everybody what you just did. So very similar, right? Person A, I think that we should outlaw smoking. It is dangerous both to the person smoking, but also to other people. Person B, that's absurd. It isn't the job. It isn't the job of the government to protect people from themselves. If your argument were correct, we would have to outlaw overeating too. Right? What's the problem in this case? Let's actually try doing this. Let's actually go back here. What's actually different? What's gone wrong? That wasn't true in the first instance. I would say that the big difference here is that person A's argument is being misrepresented. Person A is claiming smoking is dangerous not just to the person doing it, but also to other people. And not simply saying people should be protected from themselves as a result. We actually have a fallacy. What fallacy is this? This is the straw person fallacy. Person B is making person A's position worse, making it sort of dumber, stupider, and then showing, of course, yeah, a dumb position produces absurd consequences. But person A's position in this case is way more nuanced, way more careful, and that nuance and care is being overlooked by the argument that person B has made. So in this case, this is a bad reductio argument because it commits the straw person fallacy. All right. So how did that example work? Was that example clear? Is everyone seeing the fallacy that's being committed? Any questions? All right. Excellent. And people want it to be up a little bit longer, so I'll put that example. We'll put that one back up. Let me know when everyone is done writing it down. They just send me a follow-up chat. All right. Everyone else finished? Excellent. So let's lay out actually the criteria by which I'm going to ask you to evaluate these arguments. And we'll end today. Today's going to be a quick. Today was a quick one. I just wanted us to practice doing this. Get used to the oddity. I don't know if this is as odd for you as it is for me. The classroom is way more fun. All right. So here are the criteria we're going to use to evaluate these arguments. I'm going to add this quick little qualifier. We're not going to worry about this or focus on this for this class, but there are actually deductive versions of reductio ad absurdum arguments too. That you particularly see these all the time in math. Actually, math uses them all the time. They also are found in philosophy context as well. But the deductive uses, you're not just showing that some proposal produces an absurdity or an unacceptable result. You're showing that a proposal actually produces an outright contradiction. And logical contradictions are thought to be impossible. So if a proposal produces actually a logical contradiction, that would actually be a deductive argument. And your argument has to be wrong because it's produced this logical contradiction. We're only going to worry about inductive reductio absurdum arguments where the conclusion is going to be unacceptable in some sense. So here's going to be our criteria. And first thing, a good reductio ad absurdum argument is going to have to satisfy all of these conditions. So first one, entailment must genuinely be absurd, problematic, or unacceptable. This one's not usually going to be super relevant, but it comes up occasionally. You see it sometimes in politics, for example, where someone will say, "Hey, you know, I've heard." I'm going to use a liberal example of this. You can find conservative ones too. Someone will say like, "Hey, I think we should increase the social safety network for people by ensuring that people who lose their jobs are able to still, keep their houses or whatever." And people will say, "But that idea is absurd. It will lead to, people who aren't working being able to lead, healthy lives." And the liberals like, "Yeah, but I don't find that absurd. That's what I want." Right? Like perhaps that's absurd from one perspective, but that's actually acceptable from my perspective. Right? And we come up with conservative versions of it too. It needs to be the case that the entailment you're pointing to is something that sort of everyone involved in the conversation would actually agree is absurd, problematic, or unacceptable. In some sense. This one isn't a main criteria, but it can come up occasionally. More importantly, we have to make sure we avoid two fallacies. So first, the argument must avoid the strong person fallacy. I actually, the person making the reductio has to accurately portray the position that it's critiquing. In that second example I gave, the person B was misrepresenting person A's argument, right? They perhaps drew forth absurd or problematic or unacceptable consequences from that distortion, but they were getting the initial argument wrong, and so the reductio doesn't do any useful work. Last thing, you have to avoid the slippery slope fallacy. The reductio has to show that the entailment is plausible. Like in that example I gave earlier, where the person B was saying, "This is absurd. If we outlawed smoking, next thing you know, we're going to outlaw overeating too," right? Talking about that as a real consequence. That's perhaps a possible consequence of person B's proposal, but it's probably, or person A's proposal rather, but it's a pretty unlikely one, right? That argument falls prey to the slippery slope fallacy. Right? You have to satisfy all three of these conditions to have a good reductio. So what you might be asked to do, say, on the group work for next class, you might be asked to go through a series of reductio arguments and say, is it a good argument? Is the entailment genuinely absurd? 1, is it the argument genuinely avoid the small person fallacy? 2, is the argument avoid the slippery slope fallacy? And we can come back. I want us to come back in. Any questions, thoughts about these criteria? Anyone want me to bring back up the screen? three criteria? Yes? I'll put the screen back. Or I actually see the question first. Jacob. There you go. Jacob, you should be unmuted.
Yeah, can you bring back the screen real quick?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I can see the chat, so I'll just put. Actually, no, now I can't see the chat. So I was able to see the chat. Oh, there we go. I got the chat back. So yeah. So let me know. We'll do another couple seconds up here, and then I'll come back. And the intent probably, and you can send me a chat if you want a little bit more time on it. Everyone else good? Awesome. So what I'll have you do tonight, I'll give you a quick little homework assignment with these Reductio problems. Ask you to just try a couple out. I'll give you the books and the directions the book gives are a little vague, so I'll give a little more precise directions for it. Try a few of these, and we'll do some on Friday. We'll come in, we'll have a group activity where you go over about four of these questions or four of these problems with the group. Go through those three criteria to evaluate them. Do it together. And then at the end of that, my guess is that should maybe take 25-ish, maybe 30 minutes. And then we'll have a little bit of time for reviewing for the exam as well. Yeah, so that's what I had for you all today. I'm going to unmute everyone. Any last questions before I do that? All right, you're all good to go. I'm going to unmute everyone in case people wanted to chat with either one another or with me for a little bit. Yeah, and I will see you all on Friday. Thanks. This is super weird. We're gonna make it work. Have a good one. And I'll unmuting people. So if anyone wants to chat, you can chat.
Get ready to be blasted.
I will stop the recording for the ASIC.